On the 9th of November 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. We'll take a look at why it was constructed and how eventually it was removed, both politically and physically speaking. Also in this episode, 2 weddings which included Henry VIII, but only one of which he was the groom at, and yet the other one did include one of his wives. His marriage was so secret that I'm going to take you through the evidence for it, and you can make up your own mind as to whether it actually happened or not. Thank you for joining me, Philippa Lacey Brewell, for This Week in British History. If you're a history lover, then you are definitely in the right place, so just go ahead and hit subscribe. The first story this week is within living memory. On the 9th of November 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. At the end of the Second World War, Germany was split between 4 powers: Britain, America, France and the Soviet Union. The Western powers of America, Britain and France controlled West Germany. Soviet Union controlled East Germany. Berlin, however, fell into the East Germany, Soviet Union controlled area. But Berlin was split between the West and the East, therefore fell under different controlling powers. By 1945, the competing superpowers of the United States and the Soviet Union were beginning what we would be referred to as the Cold War, with each of them wanting to exert their power on the post-World War world. 1949 saw the official splitting of the country of Germany into West and East. In 1952, the East German government closed the border to West Germany, but in Berlin it remained open. In 1961, there were rumours circulating that a hard border would be put in Berlin city, preventing those from East Berlin to travel into West Berlin. Overnight, between the 12th and 13th of August 1961, barbed wire was put up along the border and crossing points closed. Families and neighbourhoods were literally divided overnight. That barbed wire barricade would eventually become a concrete fortified structure. The Berlin Wall was in fact 2 walls, not one, 2 walls running parallel to each other with a space in between. It ran for 96 miles and stood at a height of 13 feet. The walls were heavily guarded, and that strip of land in between the 2 walls was known as the Death Strip. The East German Guard kept heavy surveillance over the wall and were authorised to shoot and kill anyone trying to escape to West Berlin. The wall was lined with 302 watchtowers, and 100 people were shot trying to cross the border in its 28-year existence. By 1989, the Cold War was coming to an end, and the Soviet administration under Mikhail Gorbachev was putting pressure on the East German authorities to relax some of their restrictions about travelling into West Germany. Early in the evening of the 9th of November, the East German Politburo media spokesman Günter Schabowski made a statement about new regulations which would allow citizens to travel to the West, and he said they would come into effect immediately. Journalists took him at his word, and the message got out to West Germans and East Germans, and by 10:30 p.m. thousands of people had gathered, most of them at the crossing at Bornholmer Strasse. But crowds quickly gathered at checkpoints all along the wall, and soon passport checks and any other checks for going in and out through the checkpoints were abandoned, and people flowed freely through. Citizens celebrated, and 2 million people from East Berlin flowed into West Berlin in one weekend to join in the celebrations. One journalist described the scenes as the greatest street party in the history of the world. People used hammers and picks to knock away pieces of the wall. Soon after, the bulldozers moved in and the wall was removed. Almost a year later, on the 3rd of October 1990, the reunification of Germany was made official. The 14th of November 1532 is the possible date of a secret marriage between Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. Did they or didn't they? Well, according to chronicler Edward Hall, they did. Henry and Anne had arrived back on the 14th of November to Dover from Calais. They had been visiting the French court of Francis I, where Anne had been paraded and treated as Queen Consort, despite the fact that Henry was still technically married to Katherine of Aragon. They'd travelled back from Calais in dreadful weather conditions. The journey over there had taken them around 5 hours on calm seas. However, the seas were not kind to them on the way back, and it took around 28 hours. Now, I don't know about you, but if I had been on a boat on a churning sea for 28 hours, I would not be feeling very well for quite a long time. But we are led to believe that Anne and Henry married as soon as they landed on English soil. Henry and Anne stayed at Dover Castle for 2 days from the 14th till the 16th of November, and so it could be that that is where the marriage ceremony took place. In Edward Hall's chronicle, he did state that the marriage was so secret that hardly anyone knew of it. So we have the Chronicle of Edward Hall to say that this marriage happened, but there's also a little bit more circumstantial evidence in the Royal Book. Now, the Royal Book set out the rules for all sorts of ceremonies, including the reception of a foreign princess into the country and conveyance to her marriage. We know that Anne was keen that her queenship would be seen as irrefutable and legitimate. She would have known about this book and taken it seriously. It stated that the Queen-to-be would land on English soil and be taken to the point where she would be married. This, of course, assumed a foreign princess, which up till now had generally been the case. Anne had been treated as queen consort to Henry during their visit to France, so perhaps this just felt like fate. Details are lacking, as you would expect with a secret marriage, but it would have been necessary for it to be secret, for Henry technically was still married to Katherine of Aragon. How this legally left the marriage state of Henry, I'm not quite sure, but perhaps that explains why there was a second marriage ceremony. The second marriage ceremony took place on the 25th of January 1533 at Whitehall, so just 2 months after the initial one, and was again a secret ceremony. By this point, Anne Boleyn was pregnant. And if you want to learn more about that marriage ceremony, then there is a further video and podcast for you to listen to. So Anne may not have had a lavish wedding ceremony, although she did have a lavish coronation. Again, there's a video on that if you're interested. In fact, Henry never had a lavish wedding ceremony. All of his weddings were private affairs. That was in direct contrast to an earlier wedding ceremony that he had been involved in 31 years prior between his older brother Arthur and Katherine of Aragon, and we're going to talk about that one now. The 14th of November 1501, and Arthur Tudor marries the Spanish princess Katherine of Aragon. Arthur Tudor, heir to the English throne, would today marry the daughter of the two most powerful monarchs in Europe. The Catholic kings, as they were collectively known, Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, were a power that Henry VII wanted to align himself with. The bride and groom, both dressed in white, personified the hopes of the nation. Catherine was escorted down the aisle by Arthur's younger brother, Prince Henry, Duke of York. The aisle was taken up by an elevated walkway which stretched from the west door to the chancel, with a wider stepped stage in the middle of the nave. This was all planned out so that the couple could be seen by the congregation at all times during the nuptials. Following the wedding ceremony, the couple walked up to the high altar hand in hand to hear the nuptial mass. What happened on their wedding night was presumed to follow what was usual for a wedding night. However, Catherine was later to deny that they had intercourse, claiming that at her wedding to Henry 8 years later, she was still a virgin. Arthur died less than 5 months after the wedding on the 2nd of April 1502 at Ludlow Castle in Shropshire and is buried at Worcester Cathedral. I covered the story of his death in the video which covers the 2nd of April, which I will put a link to in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining me today. Please do take a look in the show notes for where else you can find me on the internet and how you can support my work. For now, take care. I'll see you next time. In Edward's Hall, so we have Edward's Hall. The new queen-to-be would so just a couple of months. November, December, January. Yeah. The second marriage ceremony took place on the 25th of January 1530 of the two most powerful